the mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything. I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony, air quotes nippy, Ames.
And this is A Little Bit Culty, a podcast about what happens when things that seem like a great thing at first go bad.
Every week, we chat with survivors, experts, and whistleblowers for real cult stories told directly by the people who lived through them.
Because we want you to learn a few things we've had to learn the hard way.
Like, if you think you're too smart to get sucked into something culty, you're already prime recruitment material.
You might even already be in a cult.
Oops. You better keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Season 6 of A Little Bit Culty.
Season 3 is rocking.
Season 3 is yielding lots of fascinating responses. We are very much enjoying the dialogue, and we hope you are too.
Predictable one for Shefali.
Predictable being?
We kind of knew the response would be that.
And there will be a much longer expose/discussion over on Patreon. Perhaps we will release it on this main feed. Have you been enjoying our Patreon drops here? Little gifts we're leaving.
Pencils.
I'm not talking about the pencils. I'm talking about we dropped our episode with John Bryant, and I think we're also going to share the one with my dad because it was such a hit over on Patreon. They get early access, but we decided that you, our dear listeners, should hear...
Get a greatest hits.
Yeah,
or some clips from it.
Get the greatest hits eventually. Some other nuggets coming your way, but we hope that you enjoyed Meg Applegate last week. We sure did.
Just re-listened to the episode to get some sound bites, and she drops lots of knowledge. Her story's pretty... epic and full circle.
Yes. And we appreciate what knowledge she gives to parents who are considering sending their kids to any sort of facility. Do your research, dear parents. Do your research. Next week, we have a much anticipated interview with Alice Hines, the only journalist that was invited to the homes of Jeff and Shalia from the Twin Flames universe. Yes, we've seen the documentary. We got screeners early. Thank you to Prime Video. And our thoughts on the show and our interview with Alice will be dropping next week. So stay tuned for that. And if you haven't watched the docuseries, we recommend it.
Give it a whirl. It's only 3 episodes and goes pretty quickly.
Today's episode is a follow-up conversation with one of our top listened to episodes of all time.
Got a vegan in the house.
A major vegan, a very good vegan in our opinion, Sarma Melngailis.
On the eve of Netflix premiere of its sensational docuseries Bad Vegan, still not crazy about that title, Sarma Melngailis spoke with us exclusively about all the shit she's endured for a decade with Mr. So-called Fox, a con man skilled in the culty arts of coercion and control. We know this story. At that point, there was a glimmer of hope that the show might illuminate the confounding circumstances that led to the demise of Sarma's brand, One Lucky Duck, and her beloved restaurant, Pure Food and Wine. A hip, sexy, nutritious, and delicious raw vegan joint in Manhattan, 2 blocks from the old Nexium Center, where on any given night you might have run into Janet Jackson, Bill Clinton, Stevie Wonder, and Alec Baldwin. Excuse me.
A Little Bit Culty is meant to be a pit stop on the road to healing for survivors and for those who know what it's like to be led like a culty moth to the flame of narcissism, whether in a cult of one or a whole systemized institutional cult. We can't help but look into the dark side of cult survivor narratives when they become entertainment. Now that the trauma coaster has hopefully come to a stop and the press and glare around Bad Vegan has died down, we thought it would be important to have Sarma back on.
It's important for our listeners to know that what Sarma did was brave, and it was necessary to share her story, even if the people that produced her story didn't honor her.
We want to know how she's faring and what's next.
With our warmest welcome back, Sarma. We're honored you're here.
We're honored you're here. Sarma, welcome back to A Little Bit Culty.
I'm so happy to be back. I love talking to you guys.
Back in the chat room.
We love you.
Back at you.
Just listen to the episode that we recorded with you. I want to say it was like a couple of years ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah, about a year and a half ago. And I hadn't listened to it in a while either. And I must say, I really love that episode. What's crazy is hearing myself talk about, not just talk about what happened, but hearing myself talking a bit about kind of Bad Vegan and my hopes for it because I hadn't seen it yet.
That's right.
That was the one and only interview I did before I'd seen it. It's like, I was so naive. That was interesting to hear that.
It's kind of cool that we did that because normally we don't. Normally we do it after a doc's come out.
I'm so glad we did. We did. And for a lot of reasons. And it was just interesting, some of the things that I said, that one of the many things that I got thrown at me after Bad Vegan came out was like, you never said you were sorry, like as if I made the film and edited it, or like you didn't show any remorse. But it's funny how I addressed that in our interview when I hadn't even seen it yet. For all I knew, I did, express how crappy I felt about it or whatnot. But I'm really, really glad we did that. And I really like it. And I feel like there really is a lot that's so valuable in there. So hopefully anybody listening to this will go back and listen to that one.
Definitely. I made the decision for myself not to watch Bad Vegan again because I remember what I didn't like about it.
Yeah.
It's taken enough of my time, and my focus and our focus on having you back is more like finding out how you are now and how it's been to deal with all that.
Yeah. I've done so many podcasts where I've had to kind of defend myself and correct things. And what I did, and I'm really glad I did it, is because I was debating talking to this media outlet or doing an interview here or there kind of in print. And finally, I just was like, no. I'm just going to write what I want to say and put it on my website. And maybe that's less exposure, but at least it's all in my words and it's there. And like, I'm controlling the narrative, which obviously is very important. So I'm really glad I did that. I mean, I cannot tell you how many people say to me that they watched Bad Vegan, they thought this or they thought that, or they were just sort of confused and they found me online. They found my website. Much appreciation for anyone who read everything that I wrote because it's quite long. But on my website, I wrote this kind of very detailed explanation of the things that were misleading and incorrect and why, and kind of answered those questions and kind of tried to correct the record. And I did have to put out more. I put out a lot more than I had wanted to. Like I posted this letter that I'd written called Dear Mr. Fox that kind of really tells in a bit of a more gut-wrenching way what happened in the form of this angry letter that I'd written to him that I never intended to put anywhere, or maybe I would have incorporated some of it in my book draft, but I put that up there. And the number of people who've said to me, like, they're so glad they read that and, they get it now. And
well, the value of podcasts and long form interviews too, it's why they're so popular right now, right? Because how many times have you had an assessment of someone or whatever intel you've had on them, seen them in a podcast and immediately seen how the portrayal of them was inaccurate, and for better or for worse. Not just like, oh, they were made bad by the media, they're really good people, but you can actually see people who've been made good by the media and like, so the long form interviews, the eyeball test to me are so valuable.
I really like podcasts. The other thing I got was so many people said, like, holy shit, when I heard you on A Little Bit Culty podcast, you sound like a totally different person. And I guess, mainly I was sort of more relaxed and had a lot of time had passed. So I was much more educated on what had happened to myself. And it's a very different context talking to you guys when I know you understand than, sitting in a studio getting interviewed by people that don't understand on camera. That's going to be, it's a very different context. And also it's like very carefully edited. And whereas this is just our conversation.
We're hoping to do it again. And for that, I made a special lemon, ginger, green fruit juice just in your honor to toast you.
I had my electrolyte water. I'll admit to that this morning.
Of course.
It's great. It's really great.
It's good stuff.
How the fuck are you doing? How is your life?
That is a very good question. And here's where I can actually honestly answer that question, because I don't know if you guys get this all the time, but like people will slide into your DMs and they're really nice or with them. And how are you? How are you doing? And I'm like, how do you even answer that question? I struggle with that all the time. But nowadays, I'm actually struggling a bit. And it was making me think about how the whole healing and recovery process is not at all linear, right? So like, you might be like doing fine and better kind of early on, but then for whatever reason, like you kind of need to dive back into healing, or, something else happens and you go, oh shit, I trusted somebody again. And now I'm getting hurt again. And like, oh God, what is going on? And then you kind of have to go back into it. So it's not at all like a linear process. I keep thinking about how down the road, like if I am suddenly a person with like vast resources, how much I would want to create resources and support for people on the other side of this, because inevitably, more often than not, you're like financially destroyed. And I'm coming at this from the perspective of, usually I'm interacting with people who are in a situation the way I was in like a one-on-one situation. Not only is it a little bit culty, it's extremely culty, it's entirely culty. Mark Vicente did this thing about like 25 things about being in a cult or something like that, but every single one applies in my situation. So these types of relationships, it's very culty. It's very culty, not just a little bit culty. Yeah. And so the parallels are all there. But yet it's different when you're kind of on your own healing, right, and there's nobody else there who kind of really went through it.
That's the distinction of your experience, because people hear, oh, Nexium, whatever these other things are. They go, oh, I get the con. They know what it is. But the Cult of One doesn't really seem to have that street cred amongst the empaths. Right. Most people are kind of like, how'd that happen to you? Unless, of course, it's happened to them and they have a language for it. It's more difficult, right?
Oh, it's just this one person.
Or like kind of manipulated, almost like anybody that's been manipulated in any way, at least has that understanding of how it could happen. And I feel like, on the other side of Bad Vegan coming out, I know just from all that I've heard from people, I know it's really, really helped people who've already been through it, because they see that it happened to me too. And then they feel less alone. Right. So that's been extremely valuable. It's been valuable for people who've been through it just to see me talking about it and go, oh, okay, well, it happened to her too. Therefore, I feel less stupid. I feel less shame or whatever. That's really gratifying. But what's sad is that I think it did very little to nothing for helping people understand who didn't already understand it. Right. So there's no kind of explanation for how it happens. And in fact, whatever, I make the argument that it was like deliberately misleading and almost brilliantly done in a way where you can see how people really view, it's like people view things, they read things, they take things in through their own lens of personal experience. So what happens is that like some people saw it one way and then a lot of other people saw it another way. And the people who saw it one way don't understand how the other people saw it the other way. Right. So people will say to me like, oh, well, no, you'd have to be a moron to think that like you're a criminal and you were in on the con. And it's like, all right, well, then that means there's a lot of those people out there. And they're not just like internet trolls. I mean, I would hear it from like smart friends of friends who would have watched it and come to the conclusion that like, somehow I'm a con artist. I was in on it. Yeah. I was not expecting that,
When people do that, do they think you're still doing the con now and you had an about face and decided to do a documentary about it? Like, is that the narrative? Is that really what they're championing? That like you were in on the con and now you're still doing the con? Like now that you're out, it's performative?
By a lot of people, I get lumped into this like Anna Delvey bucket. Because the Inventing Anna story. So like she's kind of out there doing things, right? But she's kind of the one who did them. You know what I mean? So I feel like I get almost pushed into that bucket. And what was pointed out to me that I hadn't even really thought of is that there's a lot of people who didn't watch it, but they saw all the marketing, right? If that's all you saw, you would assume that I am like that. Because you would just see like, the advertisements where it says fame, fraud, fugitives. And like, you would think, oh, here's this woman who was involved in this con. And the way that the marketing and all that is put forward, it looks like that I was the con artist.
I was just happy to be able to defend you, because you shouldn't have to, when people heard that we had interviewed you, and then I could refer people to it and then go, oh, that really changes things. I felt very good about that. And I was, on your behalf, was really pissed at the people who made it. And we don't have to talk about it anymore. I just feel it is a good starting point to talk about like, how do these things get made? How do they fucking capitalize. Like, how much money did they make? And you're just sitting there as this duck.
They made a ton of money. And I had been given the impression that at the end of the show, they were going to put in the thing about how, I'd gotten this amount of money to repay my employees, which was the tiniest amount. That was the smallest amount of debt that I owed. But that was like what weighed the heaviest. My employees had been repaid, but that's it. I didn't make money from it. But I know, the filmmakers made millions. Like, they made a ton of money. I don't want to be like, woe is me. But on the other side of it, like, I was like alone with this fire hose in my face of a mixture of support and vitriol. So it's like, getting hugged and punched at the same time, like nonstop all day long. And it was overwhelming. It was exhausting. I was totally alone with it and trying to figure out, like, what do I do? What do I do? Do I, like Dr. Phil's trying to get me to go on? No, I'm not going to do that. It was a really, really overwhelming time. And it was really frustrating to have to be on the defense. The contrast is, for example, one of the situations that I think most mirrors my own, which people wouldn't expect, is the Sarah Lawrence story, Stolen Youth.
Mm-hmm.
That guy, the Larry Ray, he seems the most similar to, Mr. Fox. I call him Mr. Fox.
Yeah.
That guy, his psychology, what he did, his own, the fact that he sort of also seems to be delusional himself. It's like a little unclear. So much about that situation resonated so deeply for me. And so listening to, I know you guys interviewed, I think, Daniel,
Mm-hmm.
and they were interviewed again recently by Dr. Ramani. And listening to those, I was a bit floored by it in a way where I just felt really sad, because listening to it was so hard, because so much of Felicia's experience resonated, so many things. And I'm listening to it, and I'm listening to Dr. Ramani, like at every turn, validating everything, like, yes, because he was this, and yes, kind of validating it in this way that I was like, oh, that's really comforting. I just got really sad because I was like, I want that. Anybody kind of on the other side of this, if you're going to go out into the media, like, yeah, you want to be really careful where you're going.
I was going to say it's symptomatic of the problem, and why I think it's important you tell your story. You unfortunately ran into people that claimed they were going to be sensitive to your story, didn't have really the capacity to be sensitive to your story because they don't really see it that way. One of our people that directed ours, took our training, so had firsthand experience of like the con.
If you look at the platform, even though this was made and then it was sold, I think they knew all along it was going to go to Netflix because the director has a relationship with them. So I think it was pretty clear that's where it was going. But more and more, I'm seeing that there's this understanding that Netflix airs a certain type of show, which is maybe more like kind of flashy glamour, like entertainment oriented. And that's why I make the argument in what I wrote online that there should be another category called docutainment. It should be another category versus documentary. A straight up documentary, you shouldn't be intentionally confusing people. You shouldn't be intentionally misleading people. You shouldn't have people come to the end of it and like half the people think one thing and half the people think other thing if it's based on fact. So whereas, other places like HBO and Hulu, their documentaries seem more like serious documentaries. And I mean, I watched The Vow, and it was certainly a very different tone.
We're in good hands with HBO. Nancy Abrams and Lisa Heller, when we were going through this, and there was a point where Keith was arrested, he was going to go to jail. I was like, why would I be in this anymore? Like, my punch is thrown. I want to get my wife and family out of this. And I went to them and was kind of like, hey, look, I don't know if I really want to be in this anymore.
Right.
Because I didn't need to be. And they were great. They clearly understood it. And they had done Neverland, I think, and everything they've done is pretty good.
But Sarma, like, that was one of the questions for you is, what advice do you have to people who've come out of something like this and helping them figure out, like, do they want to be public? What have you learned? How would you suggest people go about doing something like you did? What questions would you ask differently now that you know what you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. One of the things that sort of became clear to me that I feel better about is this clear understanding for myself that, like, what happened was not my fault, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there are things about me that made it possible, right? Which is a very different thing. And the thing to understand is, like, most of those things are generally good characteristics, right? It's like what makes you vulnerable is you have a tendency to believe people. You have a tendency to believe people are good. You trust too easily, a variety of things. But part of that trusting too easily, that doesn't change. It carries over. So I trusted that the film would be done with integrity, or, the show, or whatever you want to call it. So, I think really moving forward carefully in that, I would be really wary of, I guess you'd want to look at somebody's past projects and what they've done before and what their own experiences are and what the intention is, and get as much in writing as possible, I suppose. There has been a lot of talk about like maybe doing a series where, there's sort of a bunch of stories and each one is like an episode or something. And I would potentially be involved in something like that, in which case I would trust me because I've been through it, So if there was somebody there who's like an advocate for you, who's been through it, right? So imagine if like in Bad Vegan, you, Sarah, and Nippy were like co-producers, you would be all over it, right?
Right.
And so, any situation where you're not dealing with people who don't understand what you've been through, I think is important.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they're well-meaning, well-intentioned people, one way or another, just the more protections you can get, the better. And I think also the more time that goes by, the more you understand. So had production started on it, now versus then, my interviews would have been different because there's so many times where in Bad Vegan where I'm asked questions, there's things where I probably still wouldn't know, but instead of kind of going, I don't remember. And then he put in the film like me going, I don't remember, but in a way that almost makes it seem like I'm lying like I think those things were kind of interspersed in there, I would argue intentionally, such that if your lens was to like maybe not trust me and not believe me, then you're getting confirmation for that.
Reinforced.
Right.
Yeah.
By these like bits and pieces included where I kind of go like, I don't remember. There's even parts where like he asks me questions where I don't want to answer it because to answer it honestly, I would have had to say something bad about somebody else and I didn't want to. And so I sort of hesitate, And so all these little things that make it look like I'm lying or can't be trusted. I think you guys talked about this too, is like, it's hard. It's not very safe to go out and do a bunch of interviews like right on the other side of this stuff when you're still kind of in that shocked, traumatized state, which really, I think, as you guys know, takes a while to wear off.
And you don't even realize it.
Yes.
Right.
You don't even realize it when you're in it, right? You're like, oh, I'm out. I'm fine. I got to tell the story. I got to warn people about all this shit. And then like later you're like, oh my God, I wasn't even in my body. I was like.
Exactly.
Fight or flight.
For more background on what brought us here, check out my page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped Nexium, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, and at most bookstores. And if you want to see that story in streaming form, you can watch both seasons of The Vow on HBO.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
You've heard from our sponsors. Now let's get back to a little bit culty, shall we?
There were periods of time where I was like, all right, I'm fine. Like, not I'm fine, but I felt very much more kind of confident and felt like I'd gotten past it. And then I realized, no, I have not at all gotten past this. And there's like more work to do. There's more healing to do.
No, you're right. Sarah and I should be producing on these things, or at least be consulted. You need someone who believes you unequivocally.
Well, and also you need somebody there, because I was talking to a producer about this, and I was like, my involvement would be useful because I could intervene if, the subject was being asked questions that were like the equivalent of like, well, why didn't you leave? It's like, no, you can't ask that question. I could be, like an advocate for that person.
I called those, were you wearing a short skirt questions?
Yes.
Oh, that's
right?
so good.
Yes.
Oh my God.
You know what? You can fuck right off. That's what I would say.
Exactly.
You tell him, Sarah.
Well, you know what?
You just tell
that's
him.
one of the things that chaps my ass. And I'm sure you've thought about this, but just for our audience to really think about what it means to go through something like what you went through, to be betrayed by somebody, to be manipulated, coerced, betrayed, used, and then to do it all over again with a fucking production company. I mean, the level of horrific I'm so mad at them. I'm not even Netflix. It's not Netflix really. It's the people, right?
Yeah. I mean, Netflix didn't make it, but the way Netflix marketed it and really.
Right. That's true.
I had very little involvement with them, just a little bit with sort of the kind of PR side of it. But I was all ready to cooperate. I thought like on the other side of it, I'd be out there like, doing promotion for it and like talking about, all the productive things and like talking about how it's misunderstood in the criminal justice system and being sort of an advocate. And instead it was like, they knew what was going to happen. So it was like just cut off and then I'm on my own. And I mean, the thing that was so astonishing too was that like Perpetual Pups weird video campaign they did.
Who was that?
Oh my God, don't even tell me. Did you see that?
No.
It's like a 1 minute long video. And it was this weird campaign where like, if you go on Twitter, if you're like a dog person, it was like this promoted tweet. It looked like a company called Perpetual Pups. And you're like, oh, what's this? And you click on it, kind of realize obviously by the end of it that it's a parody, but it's like they show people kind of running on the beach with their dogs. And it's like, do you want your dog to live forever? And it's this whole thing. And I found it cruel, not like necessarily on my behalf. I mean, I found it cruel on my behalf, but also you're preying on people's love for their pets. Anyway, it's like this, it's this thing meant to suck you in, and then you click on it and it's actually a link for Bad Vegan. But it's like making fun of me. The whole thing is like this spoof, kind of totally making fun of me.
How horrific. Who made that? That was Netflix?
Netflix. Yeah. And I really like, this day, I would be genuinely so curious to sit in a room with whoever came up with that. And then it went through the chain of approval and whatever. I'd want to be like, did you really think that was like cool, like or funny,
appropriate,
because again, like just take it a little bit further. Like, would you make some equivalent ad like that? Say you made a show about Harvey Weinstein and all of his victims, right? Would you make some sort of an ad that makes fun of them? You know what I mean? Like, would that be okay?
Like,
where's the line?
Do you want to be a famous actress? Come up to my hotel room.
Netflix made that?
Yeah.
Shame.
That was really a bummer. Yeah. So they can go fuck themselves. But really it was the filmmakers. And so the other thing that is, I'm glad that I have the awareness of the mind bendingness of it, is that people kind of involved or who might want to get me to do it again, which has been a thing, have kind of said to me like, no, it really wasn't misleading. Nobody thought that you were in on it. No. Everybody saw through that bit at the end where you're laughing on the phone with him. Like nobody took that seriously. No, you're imagining it. Like it really was fine. What is that? It's like gaslighting. But so people trying to maybe get me to do something like that again and saying, no, your experience isn't real because that isn't real. Maybe that was just one or two people, but no, it wasn't really bad at all. It was fine. And no, it wasn't. And it wasn't just a handful of people, and it wasn't just a few internet trolls. It was like friends of friends and just random experiences. Like I got in a fight with this guy at the dog park, and I don't fight with anybody except if people are like being dicks. It was a dog park situation where somebody was kind of endangering the safety of the dogs there. And this guy was like, I know who you are. You're the bad vegan.
This is the first in-person troll.
There have been others, but this was just like,
yeah,
it was just so unexpected and out of context of anything to do with it, that like the way he said it, he was like, I know who you are. You're the bad vegan. As if he was outing me and going, I know who you are. You're the bad vegan. Yeah. The way he said it was like, wait a minute.
Well, how'd you respond? What'd you do?
I think I was kind of in shock when he said that.
Yeah.
But I was in a very defiant mood because I was defending dogs. The guy was such a douchebag. That it was easier not to take it personally.
Right.
But it struck me that that it was interesting that that's his perception, is that he's almost like he felt like he had one over on me. Like he's calling me out on knowing that I'm this bad person.
So if anyone's ever in doubt about what Netflix did or didn't do, just the fact that they even named it Bad Vegan.
Yeah.
Is the indictment, right? Like it already says you're the bad vegan. Okay. It's not like, is she a bad vegan? It
sounds like that's the thesis.
I knew that's what it was going to be called, but I sort of I naively thought that was sort of the title because that's the way the tabloids had portrayed me.
Right.
And so that the story would be like, look, this is how she was portrayed by the tabloids, but really she's not. And this is the truth.
Right.
They could have named it The Good Vegan.
No, The Adventures of a Vegan.
And I never even gave myself the title of a vegan. So my book is a whole process. It's been almost done for a really long time. And then I've been pulled away. Even working on Bad Vegan took an enormous amount of time, like a huge amount of my time and energy. So I just have a beef with these things that call themselves documentaries, and they're not necessarily, and they're clearly going to make a lot of money from it. And they consume everybody's time, not just mine, but also all the other people they interviewed, even if they don't use it. That in itself is a thing. But so that, I got distracted by that, then the aftermath of it. And then moving back here into the city and like potential projects and things and whatnot. And so I've been distracted by sort of one thing after another. And I really just want to finish it. And I really, really, really want to get it out. And I mean, the good news is it is almost done. I mean, it's so almost done. It's also incredibly long. And what I might end up doing is putting out a sort of condensed version, which is like a more normal book size version, but then also putting out the really long version. Because part of what is useful about the really long version is that you get a lot more background into my life, and everything that I include about my personal background, I included it because I felt like it was relevant to, how I ended up in this situation. Like this is the type of a person that I was that kind of is relevant to what happens later on. And also just understanding, maybe my psychology and how I grew up and all that. But then also Mr. Fox, some of it is like coming along with me on this journey, because while I've been writing it, I'm sort of trying to figure out like, how did this happen? And kind of very much pointing out, things that don't really make sense, or things that I'm trying to understand, or like, isn't that interesting? And also just going through what happened over and over again. And so a person reading it really kind of comes along with me on the experience in a way that they wouldn't in a much shorter version. So my feeling is to kind of maybe put both out, which is also why I've been wanting to self-publish it. Because of my cookbooks, it's like, it was frustrated that like on my second cookbook, I hate the cover. I mean, it's not horrible, but I hate it. It's not what I would have chosen, and yet it's me on the cover. And so having been through that experience where like they ultimately have control, that's why I was like, I'm going to self-publish it.
Totally. But I also know now that you can develop contracts where you have control. I feel like when you self-publish, you cut off a lot of options also.
I think that there's also like the stigma of the appearance that if you self-publish, it's because you couldn't get a publishing deal.
Right.
But I think that's like, it's not going to be long before that changes. The list of pros and cons, it's pretty clear I should self-publish it.
Okay.
Even though you're not going to get your books as easily into like Walmart. I'd rather have the trade-off of controlling the timing, controlling every output along the way. Like basically, like I still own it.
Okay.
One of the misperceptions is that I must have like a team of people and kind of an operation and no, there's no team of people here. It's like me and Leon.
How can we use our platform to do a little megaphone announcement? What would you want people to know about where you are now and what needs to be cleared up?
Good question. I mean, it's out there now that I moved back to, I'm in this apartment where I am because it's close to the restaurant space, and that I moved back to reopen the restaurant. But that's kind of all up in the air right now. And there's a bit of behind the scenes drama, and that's why it's been stalled. There's so many things on the horizon, some of them really good and I'm really excited about. But until some of them start to happen, I continue to be in a very challenged situation. So I have to worry about, how am I going to get by? How am I going to pay Leon's vet bills? What am I going to do about my rent? And like, I'm not very good at promoting myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I have a hard time being like, hey, join my Patreon, like buy these t-shirts, do this thing. Like that's really hard for me. And not only is it hard for me, but then that person who then slides into my comments and calls me a grifter, which is like, to be called the thing that is describing the perpetrator,
what happened to you,
is like uniquely gut-wrenching and really hits. No matter how, like you'd have to be like super strong to not let that get to you. It's really hard. So therefore it's very easy to be sort of like shamed back into a corner. How dare I come out and, put something out there for sale or, ask for anything at all. I tried. I do have a Patreon. It's funny because when I first started it, I thought like, all right, well, I'll post like, some recipes and like little tips and things. That's kind of how I started it. And it's funny because what it turned into is actually something really sweet. It's like a smaller community than I imagined, but like it's kind of turned into, this sounds like an overused term, but it's kind of turned into like this safe space. It sucks because you don't want to have people have to pay on the one hand, but also it sort of weeds out kind of the troll community, and it keeps it more private. But what it's turned into is like, I'm not posting recipes anymore. It's almost like an online journal. So I can go on there and I can post things that I wouldn't necessarily put on Instagram. And I can write things about what's going on and how I'm feeling or what I'm struggling with in a very honest way. And it's become like this sort of tight little community of people where they're very understanding of that. And they've stuck around for that reason.
And they want to support you.
Positive.
They want to support you.
Yeah, exactly. Then there's sort of always this trade-off of like, well, how much time do I spend on that versus how much time do I spend on my book and like the things that I need to do for my future, and kind of trying to like sort out this drama that I'm in right now, and also kind of how to present myself, because I'm in this funny situation where, because there's this opportunity to reopen my restaurant, which is to stop and think about what that means, to reopen the same place in the same location. And it's funny because in interviews, before I ever even thought that was a possibility, people would ask me, would you want to get back into the restaurant business? And I would always say no, but unless it was the same restaurant in the same space, with like a lot of the same people coming back, then I would do it. And then that opportunity came around because nobody had ever permanently rented out that space, and it's there and I have keys to it, but I don't have the lease. And the person who has it, we're in a bit of a dispute. What's fascinating is that all of these things come back up about like, wait a minute, how did I get into this situation? And all of these issues about trust, and I shouldn't have trusted. And, it gets me thinking too about, am I in this pattern where I keep getting into situations where people think that they can kind of control me? I think the dynamics of what happened, obviously what happened with Mr. Fox is an extreme, but these kinds of dynamics happen over and over again until you really wake up to it. Not wake up to it, but really, 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 really understand it. And the other hard thing is that on the other side of this, I think I said this earlier, people are almost always in a even more vulnerable position than when they were vulnerable enough to get into what they got into in the first place, right?
Yes.
Because you're now destroyed on the other side of it. And so you're in a position of like, unfortunately, really needing help, and you like need support and you need help. And so I have some very close friends and some people who are like around and supportive, and that means everything. But then you're also very open to people coming around and being like, here's this person in a vulnerable position. I think I can get something here, or I think I can take control of this and, exploit it and turn it into something. So I think that these dynamics happen like on a less extreme scale, not just in personal circumstances, but in business circumstances too. I have certain red flags that are not just in personal relationships. If somebody says to you, they're not going to do the thing that it didn't occur to you that they would do, they're probably going to do it. You know what I mean? Like if you were going to do a business deal and somebody said to you like, look, I'm not going to fuck you over. You're like, wait a minute. I didn't think that you would. Why did you feel the need to say that?
My dad and I would always joke, and when someone starts a sentence, I'm not racist, but
yeah.
Why would you?
Or like this emphasis on like, you need to trust me. You need to trust me. You need to trust me. Do you trust me? That is a huge red flag, because it's like, well, I do. Right. I did. But like now I'm realizing, that was a mistake. I mean, I'm sure you guys are aware of like DARVO, right? Which I think is such a useful concept to understand. It's, deny, attack, reverse, victim, offender. And basically it's like if you kind of point out something somebody's done that's wrong and they immediately turn it around and make themselves the victim. I mean, that happens in all kinds of contexts. And I've dealt with it in like business relationships.
You have the wisdom now, and your relationships are going to be changing, right? You're re-entering the world that you left with the new sense of self. With relationships, you've probably trained a certain way, and you're training them differently now, and you're getting pushback.
Yeah.
Potentially. I would guess. You have wisdom now, right?
Well, yeah. And also the wisdom to know that what's worrisome is that, if you get into a situation and you're dependent on somebody, you're going to keep making excuses for their shitty behavior, right? So if they're not like treating you with the respect that they should, but you're dependent on them, you're going to let it slide because you're dependent on them. Right. So basically what I had to do was like walk away from a situation where now it's like, I basically have no net. Things are scary, but I'd rather be in that situation than be attached to something where I'm going to be, controlled and something that I know is wrong. Right. So it's, I guess the personal equivalent would be like just kind of leaving a relationship, being on your own, even if you're like financially vulnerable. Yeah. But that's better than being stuck in something that is bad. So it's kind of having that understanding that so well that you're willing to go, okay, you know what? One way or another, if I walk away, it's going to work out. Like it's going to work out and it's going to be better because I might be scared. Things might be challenging and scary, but that's better than being attached in a situation that you know isn't right for you. And then just kind of keeping that faith that like, it's going to work out. It's going to work out. It's going to work out, you know?
It's better to be free.
Exactly. And also like really paying attention to how you feel. Your gut has all that wisdom that we don't even understand how it has the wisdom that it does and how it's trying to communicate it to us, right? And so the more you stop and pay attention to that. So if you think about
That's
like,
awesome.
you know, all the meetings I had with like a certain person and people, how did I feel during and after them? Well, I felt sick to my stomach. I felt icky. I felt terrible. I felt like not understood, not heard. I felt just bad, like, ugh. Everything about it felt bad. And then it's like, well, here's some other people that you could work with, or here's another situation. And how do you feel when you talk to those people? How do you feel in those meetings? And it's like, well, in these meetings, I feel energized. I feel inspired. I feel excited. Well, you know, that's the way to go. And it doesn't matter if one on paper maybe seems like that makes sense because of these reasons, or people are telling you like, this is the way to go because, you know, this seems like the safer route. But it's like, but that one makes me feel really bad. And this one that might seem much riskier actually makes me feel really good, right? So having the experience to understand that all day long, you want to go with the one that makes you feel really good, even if it seems riskier and other people are telling you that maybe you should go the other way.
This podcast wouldn't happen without our amazing, supportive, generous patrons. Are you with us? Come find us over on Patreon at patreon.com/alittlebitculty for bonus episodes, exclusive content, and the occasional Zoom with our fan favorites from our past episodes. It's a lot of fun over there, people.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
Break time's over, people. Let's get back to this episode of A Little Bit Culty. It's a good one.
The only challenge I would just say, and I agree with you, is just this caveat, at least for me, that sometimes I have felt really good because I was also being love bombed. I felt community and love and all those yummy things that overrode any tinglings in my gut. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what's scary about getting into a situation where you're dependent on somebody or where it would be hard to get out of it. It's like agreeing to like move into somebody's place if you're not 100%, and that doesn't apply to me, but like if you get into a relationship with somebody that would be hard to get out of, then you're going to rationalize, you know, the red flags or shitty behavior or whatnot, and it's going to be harder to get out of.
Yeah.
I'm time and time again examining my own behavior, my own thoughts. And I think that what's so important on the other side of this, and it's hard because it's really hard for a lot of people, especially like if you have kids and you're trying to work and get by and whatnot, but having like alone time, quiet time, and time to like stop and reflect and think. It's the opposite of what, you know, the cult leader manipulator does, which is to keep you in an exhausted state. So you don't have time to stop and reflect, right? You know, it's like they keep you exhausted and kind of going. Well, you could be kind of like exhausted and going because you're in like, you know, you're working really hard and you're doing all these things that are positive, but, you know, really like guarding your alone time and whatever it is, listening to podcasts, journaling and evaluating kind of what you're going through and allowing yourself the space to have insights. That's been really helpful for me because it happens to me all the time where I'll hear something or I'll be thinking about something and I'll realize like, oh, this like business situation, it's kind of similar to that. It kind of feels like that. And just having that space is so incredibly important.
Well, I want you to know that our Patreon, we'd let them know that we're talking to you today. And all of them were so, I mean, this is our safe space too, right?
Yeah.
Our Patreon. And everyone's just like, oh, send her our love. And she's amazing. Somebody wants to know, Juliana wants to know if you'd start a book club, which I think would be a great idea. You could do that on your Patreon too. a book club with you.
Yeah, I know. I love reading and I love reading books and I love talking about books. And because people have asked me that and people ask me about what are my favorite books all the time. And I have this habit of like starting things and then I don't quite get to finish it. Like I sort of went back to my Pinterest page because I was like, oh, I have a Pinterest page I haven't looked at in years. And so I kind of deleted all the old shit and I started putting all the books that I really like so that when people say, hey, what are your favorite books? I could just be like, hey, go to this link and here's my favorite books. And here's all the ones that are like fiction and novels. And here's the one that are like my favorite self-helpy books. And here's my favorite whatever. So I started to do stuff like that. Yeah, it'd be fun to have a book club, but I also kind of have to be realistic about not doing anything that's not going to be necessary or help me pay my bills, to be honest. My Patreon has become like, like a couple of weeks go by and I just haven't posted anything. And what's amazing is like the people that are there, like, they're like, we don't care. We get it. They're not expecting me to post, some new recipe or something like that. But then when I do post, it's like I'm very, for better or worse, it's like I'm very honest and open about what's going on and struggles. And then also, when I learn something that's been really helpful to me or, insights or some book that I read or a podcast that I thought was really valuable, I try to share that stuff there.
I love your tiers, by the way. I just looked it up. Ducklings, big ducks, and VIP ducks.
Oh, yeah.
So if anyone's listening and feels compelled to support in the safe space.
The other thing is like there's a newsletter sign up on my website. And the funny thing is if I could clone myself or I had an assistant, I could leverage that and start kind of sending out emails about what's going on. The nice thing about my MailChimp account is I have the list from way back when. So all the people that were on our like Pure Food and Wine list, it's a lot of emails.
Amazing.
I was thinking, are they going to ask me what chaps my ass?
Yes.
And just, it happened again just recently. And it's like, what really chaps my ass. So a hard part about kind of being public about this is all the, dealing with all the incoming. And there's this segment of really well-meaning, but totally off-base advice that you get. I'm sure you guys dealt with that a lot.
Yes.
Like, you should just do this. And you're like, you don't understand. Mm-hmm. But what happens a lot, I just want to like call these people out because I feel like there's a special karmic place for them. Because I do read most of my DMs and people will say nice things. I try to respond and acknowledge it, even if I don't have the capacity to like have ongoing conversations. And I've met a lot of women who've been through similar things, men who've been through very manipulative situations. I hear it all and I like to connect with people there. But what happens, and what happened again recently, is the people, always dudes, that slide into the DMs and they're like, so how much money would it take to clear your debt? And I'm like, what? Oh, I get this a lot.
Wow.
They'll slide into my DMs and act like they want to like pay off my debt or like, how much would it take to reopen your restaurant? Because, I like as if they are just going to suddenly be that savior. And it's like, wait a minute, think about what happened to me and think about the situation that I'm in and to slide in that way. And it's like, I can't immediately dismiss it because I actually have legitimately, I've filtered through those and I have met a couple of people who are legit, amazing, good people who are like, yes, I want to invest in your restaurant and I want to invest in your upcoming projects. And like, I'm here when you're ready. And that's great. That's amazing. But there's been a lot of people that slide in there and they're just like, it's like, no, you're like a creepy dude that just wants to chit chat and be gross. And always it's like a private account. There's a special place somewhere for those people karmically.
Yeah, there's a big ass chapping there.
That really chaps my ass. Those people who do that, it's like, get the fuck out of my DMs, go away.
Can I ask like 4 questions from our Patreon?
Yeah.
Rapid fire. Okay. How has it been since we spoke last about rebuilding your team, repairing relationships? Have there been some powerful reconciliations since we spoke to you last?
I don't really know how to answer that question. I mean, for example, all of the former employees that were featured in Bad Vegan, like we're all on great terms. Like I've spoken to all of them. Mm-hmm. We're friends. I'm friends with a lot of my former employees. I've seen a lot of them. It's been really, really nice to get together with some of them. One of my former pastry chefs brought me a couple of things. Like she brought me a Malomar and I cried and she brought me 2 of them. And so one of them I ate and the other one's in my freezer. It's like that, how like when people get married and they save a piece of their wedding cake and it's like, and it might like, who knows, it probably has freezer burn or whatever, but you're like going to save it I have a Malomar in my freezer right now. So it's been really nice connecting with former employees, but also kind of in this very interesting, like bittersweet way, because a lot of it's been in the context of reopening and coming back. And now all of a sudden it's like, is it going to happen? Is it not? Am I going to be set free? Am I not? And now I don't know. And so I've been kind of living in this state of uncertainty in so many areas. And I think that's been really heavy. I think that's probably what's caused this sort of emotional setback is all the uncertainty. So it's like, I don't know, my home isn't certain. I don't have any certain income. Nothing is certain. The restaurant is uncertain. Everything's uncertain. And that's created this constant level of existing low-grade stress that's made it a bit harder for me on a day-to-day basis.
That makes sense. When you were talking earlier about recovery not being linear, I feel like stress and things being like, even like you said with this person who you have the conflict with around the lease, like it's just like the wound is still so raw. So anything that feels even remotely unsettling kind of re-trigger, at least is what it's been like for me. It's like rocks me in a way that wouldn't rock a normal person. It's like, oh, it's just a contractual debate. We'll figure it out. It's like, oh, I feel betrayed all over again. And it's like, it sends me reeling. So I don't know if that's similar for you in that way.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. There's just a lot of pressure because having a lot of debts is a lot of pressure. And you don't know how hard it's going to come down on you, what the terms are. It's not like it's this controlled thing and I know precisely what it is. And okay, these are the payments I have to make. It's like it's very all over the place. And the uncertainty is draining. I think that's what it is. I think it's draining a lot of energy when there's all this uncertainty, right? Because there's that thing called decision fatigue. It's like why certain, like Silicon Valley types will like just wear the same thing every day because it's like, all right, eliminate that decision. But on a greater scale, when like you constantly are trying to decide like, well, okay, should I spend money on this thing that like maybe will help with this and bring this, or like, should I not, or should I invest my time in this, which might have this return? And then should I be worrying about this? And how can I focus on this when I have to worry about that? And all this uncertainty is energy draining. So I think that that's been the biggest thing that's been going on most of this year is just this energy drain that's been difficult. The other thing that's been kind of like just I'm like going on a bit of a tangent, but I think is interesting and something that I've noticed is, and I'm sure you guys dealt with this, is what's so interesting is this sort of reevaluating your relationship with like a certain type of faith and spirituality and belief. And what's so dangerous is how you see how that was manipulated in the past. And I notice now, and I don't know if I'm noticing it or if it's like the algorithms making me notice it, but kind of like this very nice, almost like an awakening going on. I don't know if you've noticed that. But what's dangerous is that like it's such a slippery slope from getting yourself to a place where you feel kind of comforted by a certain type of belief or spirituality. But then it's this very slippery slope into that world of cultiness.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Constantly.
Yeah. I'm sort of keeping an eye on all that stuff. What I notice so often is I hear people in very positive contexts and positive healing things and people and whatnot saying things that I go, oh my God, Mr. Fox said the same thing. But now I'm hearing it in a positive context. It's really, really kind of interesting and fascinating.
No, it's actually come up in our podcast. It actually came up in our podcast with Dr. Shefali about the people, that are manipulating know exactly what to say and what to look like. Some are real, some aren't. What you're saying is very relative.
Yeah. Yeah. And also it's like one of the things I've been really thinking about, and we're going to address this more in response to Dr. Shefali, is that I almost feel like in the whole, let's teach people the red flags, that pointing out red flags has become a little bit, I guess what I'm trying to say is, when you see a red flag, it's something for you to pause and take note of and document. It doesn't necessarily mean always the thing is the thing. If like Nancy, for example, drank coffee, right? Nancy from Nexium drinks coffee, and I meet, some person I'm going to go into business with and they drink coffee, is that a red flag? Or is that something that the person did? Do you know what I mean? So it could be a red flag. Oh, like all sociopaths drink coffee? Like maybe, maybe not. And I'm using a benign example so people don't get their knickers in a knot about it. Because the question is the person good or bad? The red flag, like I could do something that could be a red flag. Like I'm selling Patreon. You're selling Patreon. Is it a red flag? Well, maybe if you're not into like earning money for what you do or capitalism is a problem for you or whatever, like whatever the thing is. My point is that things are going to be a red flag for somebody and not for somebody else. You know what I mean? Like, how do you determine?
I think one of the things about red flags to point out is that, yes, you want to be aware of them and you want to evaluate them, but I feel like it comes back around to that question of trust. So I will very often, I'll do things like email sections of my book to people and somebody will be like, well, do you trust them? And it's like, well, okay, but what's the downside, right? So when you're thinking about whether to trust somebody in a situation and evaluating red flags, if you're able to really think about it clearly is like, what's the potential downside, right? So if something's a red flag, you want to notice it and pay attention. And it depends on the context. Like you're dating somebody and getting to a relationship with them or entering into a business agreement where you can't get out of it. What are the potential consequences? So if the potential consequences are disaster, you want to really, 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 really pay attention to those, right? Like I could maybe trust too easily in being too open about certain things or I don't know, maybe giving away too much information but is it something that could be weaponized against me, right? So, you just want to be really guarded with, anything that could be used against you, I guess. You guys know that from like all the collateral gathering and whatnot that's where you want to be really careful. If somebody's reaching out to you on the socials, if they don't have social media at all, that's a potential red flag because if their life isn't out there, if they aren't identified as who they are with their life and here's where they work and here's their family and here's their friends, then that's a potential red flag. Do you know where they work? Have they worked there a long time? Do you know their coworkers? Have they said good things about them?
Right.
You want to evaluate them, but
yes,
in the context, right?
There's not like specific, like every person who doesn't have a profile is a con artist. No, like, think about it. That's really good advice and a conversation to be continued that Nippy and I are kind of grappling with in this season. So I'm just going to summarize these amazing Patreon questions. Basically, everyone's fully supportive of a book, fully supportive of the restaurant. Many people just wish to hug you and make sure that you thrive. And that's the general theme from our Safe Space Patreon. So thank you, people.
And Sarma, I'll say one thing too. It's like when people say negative things about you, and this is actually paraphrasing some of the stuff that we learned in our curriculum. So when people say negative things about you, it's an opportunity for you to demonstrate otherwise. And I think if people are paying attention to you in the last year and a half, 2 years, they're going to see that. If they don't see it now, they're going to see it eventually.
Yeah. I mean, over time, it gets easier to...
Yeah.
I'm kind of used to a lot of the negative stuff that's to be expected. But the stuff that I didn't expect is hard to deal with. And so hopefully some of the things I'm working on now in the future will clear a lot of that up. And in a useful way, because really what I wanted with my story is for it to be useful, right? Like I want it to be helpful to other people. And not just people who've been through it or might be through it, but the people around them, because that's really hard too. It's like it's really hard when you feel like your family and close friends don't understand. And so if talking about my story could help the people around the people to whom this has happened understand better, then that's also really helpful. So that's among the goals.
Absolutely.
Well, I can't wait to see where it lands.
Yes. How's Leon's health?
Oh, he's like laying right here.
Oh,
there he is.
Hi, Leon.
Zonked out beside me. I mean, he's 13 and a half. He's doing really, really well for his age, although, he was hospitalized a couple of times with a heart issue. He's got a bit of a mystery issue right now with some thing related to the gland on his tail and the fur is falling out. But I put updates on his social media and Leon's got a lot of fans, but he's doing well for his age. And, it's a lot. I mean, I think a lot about people who have kids on the other side of this and how much work that is when I think like, how much work it is with Leon and me. I think it must be that and so much more when people have been through this kind of trauma and situation and they've also got kids to look after and protect from their healing process too.
Abusers. To
protect from abusers, but also your own, it's hard when you're kind of crying and upset. And I feel bad when Leon's around and I'm crying and I'm upset. So it must be really hard when people have kids too.
Of course, our audience I know is going to want to support you. Our audience has paid for people's therapy. They've sent computers to people who needed them. They've gone above and beyond. And one of those people actually is our Patreon member and also friend, Ken Bernstein from Nashville, who had a question for you, totally random. Have you seen The Bear on Hulu about the restaurant industry?
That is so interesting because somebody on my Patreon just asked me the very same thing because they wanted my opinion on it. And it's weird because people keep talking about that show and I don't watch anything. Like I got rid of my TV. I have an iPad for when I want to watch a bit of news or something specific, but I don't watch a lot. I did watch most of The Bear. I think I watched season 1 and most of season 2. I'm glad I did for a number of reasons, but it's a great show. And the thing that's so notable about it is if you're in the restaurant business, and maybe happens with a lot of different industries or businesses, but so many TV shows and restaurant movies where the setting is a restaurant kitchen, it's almost always across the board, like irritatingly unrealistic, like they'll just have like these glorious like piles of produce and everything's really clean. And it just is like, it's like, oh my God, it's hard to watch if you've ever worked in a restaurant kitchen because it's like, no, it is not like that at all. And everybody's like happy and relaxed. And so the thing that The Bear did really well is whoever did like the set design, like they clearly knew exactly what they were doing. Like the way the walk-in looks and the dirty floor and the containers and the fact that they all sit around a table and they are like eating their lunch out of quart containers and all the like little details about that show did really, really well. So yeah, I actually have to watch the rest of it at some point, but I do really
we should watch it too, Nip.
I do really like that show. I mean, it's that much more interesting if you've worked in restaurants.
I have. I've waitressed, I've hostessed, I've bussed. Been a long time. I just hope we get to come back to your restaurant, whatever it takes. I believe in that.
This is where I get into a little bit of like faith, but just the number of people who are like, well, that's your restaurant. You're supposed to reopen there. This space was waiting for you. Like it's I mean, it just feels like this is what's meant to happen. And like I always say, it's not, I don't want it for me. I want to bring it back for the people. And by the people, I mean for the former employees for whom that place was like home, for all the people who loved it and were regulars or just loved to go there and have special memories and who, for all the people who would like to experience it and all the good things about it. But also really importantly, like for all the people like me and others who've been through this, to be able to recover what was destroyed by this situation. Right. So I may have like lost everything, but to get back the thing that was destroyed, and I'm even reluctant to say that he destroyed, because you could argue that I destroyed it via him,
right.
However you phrase it. But there's this element of like inspiration that I feel like would be so meaningful to a lot of people.
Yes.
So that's really meaningful. This like it'd be so inspirational for other people to go, okay, if she could go through that hell and have been in the depths of the darkness and like not wanting to get up and not wanting to live and not wanting, thinking like it's all over, and to be able to come back and reopen, I feel like is important inspirationally.
It's so important.
And then there's like the sort of cherry on top of that, which is the giant like, fuck you.
Fuck you, Netflix and Mr. Fox and everybody.
But yeah, mostly like Mr. Fox, like, fuck you.
Yes,
You did not take me down. Like you thought you could destroy me and you did. But like, fuck you, I got back up.
Not forever.
And I'm back, motherfucker.
Here's a free green juice.
Like wherever that fucker is, beware everybody out. I think he's on the West Coast, like doing his thing, conning people. And I hear from people. So people have reached out to me who've had run-ins with him.
He doesn't deserve green juice. He deserves like a slice of Domino's pizza shoved up his hairy ass. That's what he deserves. Sorry. This is going to be.
Sarah, that's so bad.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sarah Edmondson.
A pizza enema.
Yeah, that would do him well, I think.
Yeah, like a reverse like pizza waterboarding from the other end.
Karma's a bitch, Mr. Fox.
Oh, which reminds me, huge shout out to Taylor Swift and that song Karma. Like I play that song and sing aloud and dance around whenever I need to feel like, you know what? Everything's going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right.
Yeah.
Like,
Taylor who?
Taylor Swift, and that song Karma is like, that's like my theme song. And I just
totally
I pull that one out. It's like when I feel like somebody's been a dickhead and it's like, you think you can keep fucking with her, and I'm like, you know what? It's gonna work out. It's gonna work out. And I play that song and it's great. So yeah, big shout out to that song.
Well, I don't want to take more of your time. I know you got your book to write and
I know I'm
a
almost
restaurant
done.
to reopen. So go do that, and please let us know how we can support you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'll see you soon. Big hugs. So
thank
proud
you.
of you.
I can't wait to see you guys again in real life.
Hugs.
Like what you hear, do you? Give us a rating, a review, and subscribe on iTunes. Every little bit helps us get this cult awareness content out there. Smash that subscribe button. You know you want to. Okay, so what's Sarma up to now, Sarah?
Well, hopefully by the time this drops, an article will be out in the world. I know she was a little bit cagey about what happened with the restaurant, and hoping that the article illuminates some of those dynamics. And we hope it all gets resolved soon because, surprise, surprise, we want to go back to the restaurant.
That's the only reason we want it to be resolved.
Well, also for Sarma's well-being and livelihood. But selfishly, we want to go back to the restaurant.
Wouldn't it be great if that restaurant came back and it's...
It will. I'm going to manifest it right now.
Uh-oh.
Right, Amanda Montel? It's magical thinking right here.
Manifest.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Check out her article. Follow Sarma on her Instagram for all the latest breaking news. Don't forget to follow us, subscribe, like, blah, 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 blah.
Well, it's not blah, blah, blah. It's actually
well, you know
kind of
the drill.
important. Right.
You know the drill.
Drill, baby. Bye.
Till next time.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production, executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound and our co-creator Jess Tardy. Our writing and research is by Holly Zadra and Matthias Rosenzweig, and our theme song Cultivated is by the artists John Bryant and Nigel Aslan.